Well, we're on the phone right now with Tom Bolt, who's the Director of Performance Management of the Franchise Board at Lloyd's of London. Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great, Frank. It's great to speak to you.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you doing this interview, and we thank you for it. Tom, let me, maybe before we even get to any talks about it, there's always in the United States, people get confused. The Performance Board sits under the Lloyd's Council, and the Performance Board is, I understand it, nominally charged with two very big roles. One, of course, protecting the Lloyd's brand name, and the other is protecting the central fund, if you will. And I know that when the Performance Board or the Franchise Board came into being relatively recently, there might have been some grumbling with underwriters that there was going to be now much closer scrutiny and oversight of what they were writing, limiting their creativity and thus and so forth. Is that pretty much what the Franchise Board does? And I mean, how is it received now with your constituents?
The Franchise Board was created through a series of franchise guidelines and standards that they came up with back in 2002-03 and adopted. And when they came up with these standards, which, by the way, were directed and derived from comments and consultation and active involvement of the managing agents themselves, where it was sort of a considered decision to try and avoid finding themselves in some of the pickles they may have found themselves in historically. They gave fairly sweeping sort of powers and standards on claims and underwriting and various things, and then they said, well, how are we going to make sure this happens and is implemented in the market at Lloyd's? Mm-hmm. And they created a franchise board that sits right underneath the Council of Lloyd's to basically conduct the bulk of the business and implement those franchise and standards. As you know, it's sometimes easier to do things with individuals rather than a committee. And so while the Franchise Board retains the authority and the oversight, they created, among other things, a Franchise Performance Directorate, which is now called the Performance Management Directorate, to actually implement that. Mm-hmm. And that's the group that I head, has about 125 people in it, who look at delegated authorities, underwriting performance, claims management performance, exposure management for the overall aggregation of CAT exposures and other things at Lloyd's. Mm-hmm. And we actually have a unit called Franchise Standards that goes around and audits to make sure people are living up to the standards. Okay. And a variety of other things. So to answer your further question real quick, I think my predecessor, Rolf Tolle, did a fabulous job implementing the role of the Franchise Performance Director in his first instance, and made it quite a much easier job in some respects for me to further implement what the Franchise Board wanted to have implemented in terms of increasingly positive standards for the market. So I think the grumbling that you may hear now, if you do, is more the grumbling that would come because of where we are in the cycle of a soft market, rather than a disagreement with the premise that the Franchise Board ought to have some oversight.
Right. I think actually, to be fair, the grumbling that I was referring to was back when the board was instituted with those sweeping reforms. People were perhaps wondering how change would affect them, the typical thing. Now,
I myself grumbled some.
Yes, you might have. I do remember your former position. Now, the UK government moves, for example, to consolidate or change the FSA and put it under the Bank of England. I mean, at one time there were, I understand, full-time 12 FSA employees either stationed at Lloyd's or assigned to Lloyd's. Have those changes by the coalition government had any effect on that level of oversight from the state?
I'm not aware of 12 people assigned full-time to Lloyd's from the FSA, but I do know we have very regular meetings with them, if for no other reason than we've tried to undertake to the market, both the FSA and Lloyd's, that we won't duplicate what each other is doing as a regulator for the various aspects we regulate. So it's a key principle. We try to avoid any duplication of effort, if at all possible.
Correct. I see you following that line, for example, with the Achilles purchase of Brit, saying that your approval is going to be conditional upon the FSA approving it.
Right.
So,
and in things such as that, we sometimes hone in on different segments of what the subject of the approval is, where we respond to some of the strengths and resources we have, and the FSA does the same with their strengths.
Okay.
So under the Bank of England, of course, there is a reorganization and a different way of looking at what's going on at insurance enterprises. But there's recent steps to put key people in under Hector Sanz, who are going to be responsible for the insurance sector. We're very pleased with those individuals and those moves as they will become public, and think there's a reasonably clear road forward for how we will be regulated and interacting with the FSA as they implement these steps as what they will be in the new part under the Bank of England. Basically two parts, one more related to consumer protection, and then one related to the functioning of insurance enterprises as financial institutions.
Let's, if we could, follow this regulatory path a bit. And I see that the Solvency II implementation for insurers have been pushed back by the extraordinarily long period of a month now. So you have till 12/31/2012. And then I noticed Dr. Ward earlier in the week beginning to publicly question the level of reserving required for catastrophe protection, for example, catastrophe insurance, echoing very much what Mr. von Baumhard, Lipp, and Wallen have been saying now for about a year. How is that all going to go over there, do you think, with the Solvency II implementation? Is that a gigantic headache coming toward you? Is it going to be manageable? Is it something that will transform the way Lloyd's business is conducted by bringing it closer to perhaps a continental standard, or how will that shake out?
Well, I'm not sure I'd refer to it as a headache coming towards me. It may already have been here for some time.
It's a headache with you, yes.
In terms of the implementation on Solvency II, the market will be spending a significant amount of money trying to implement it effectively. And in the FSA and, in fact, in the UK, there tends to be a bit of a trend towards early adoption, if not gold plating, of regulations and having them work to the point where a lot of what we're doing at Lloyd's is sort of probably the cutting edge of implementation. So some issues come up and become very visible to us maybe a little sooner than they may to others. As we do that, and for example, if you look at catastrophe, the efforts by CEOPS and others to formulate what Solvency II ought to do, it continues to evolve as well. So having a broadening of the catastrophe diversification credit is appropriate where there's enough appropriate substance underneath it to justify such a diversification. And so that's been implemented with some reference, in fact, to Lloyd's in the way that it was implemented. We continue to find other issues that become apparent to us because Lloyd's is a fairly complex business. We do business in so many countries and across so many lines of business that some things that might not be evident if you were a small monoline or regional carrier in Germany, for example, those issues wouldn't necessarily show up as you go to implement what the rules appear to say under Solvency II.
Is there ongoing dialogue with the implementors?
Absolutely.
There is. All right.
Absolutely. In fact, the General Counsel and one of the folks who spends a lot of his time speaking to the folks in Brussels will be there, I think, 2 weeks, a week from this coming Tuesday. And we have a very active and ongoing dialogue with them in terms of trying to make sure that our understanding and implementation is correct. And in fact, if we see things that appear to us to maybe work differently than we think they intended, we try to make sure that's highlighted as well. You've also seen a gradual shift to include more of the CEA, the insurance enterprises themselves, in input into the model at this time relative to the bulk of the original heavy lifting was actually done by CEOPS, which was largely insurance regulatory types who were putting that together.
Let me circle back a little bit to something you mentioned about the delegated authorities. You've been publicly quoted on that rather extensively during your first year. Of the crucible, I think you referred to it somewhere in a period of testing. I saw an interview that you had done. What percentage of business do those binding authorities represent for Lloyd's?
Lloyd's has roughly 31% of its premium in what we call delegated authorities. Of that 31% of its premium, 11 part of 31 is actually with service companies. Those are entities that are affiliated to the managing agents. and true third-party delegating authorities comprise about 20% of the business at Lloyd's.
Given the emphasis in your publicly released business plan, the Lloyd Strategy 2011-2013 document on microinsurance, would it be logical to conclude that that percentage of delegated authority is going to go up?
It could do. A lot depends on how the most effective way to implement the microinsurance model is. So there's a likelihood, by the way, that given your desire to take advantage of the benefits of a delegated authority where you pick up local knowledge, local expertise, and local implementation of practices, that would be the best way to go. So in a sense, I don't know that that'll be a huge amount of premium in addition to the 31% of the pot, but it may be a reasonable amount of activity. Like many things of this type, we want to walk pretty well before we run, so I don't expect it to be big overnight.
You, and I keep saying you, I'm using the plural of the pronoun you. When you mentioned in that same document, the Lloyd Strategy document, that the quote is something along these lines: given the current state of the insurance cycle and the need to avoid syndicate failures, the franchise board believes that the corporation need to emphasize its challenging business partner role. And then it goes on to say the consequences of this is likely to be an increase in the frequency level and formality of any interventions. That if I'm reading that, I get a slight chill up my spine if I'm a syndicate manager. I know you're charged with approving the business plan and making sure it's coming into line toward the end of the cycle and watching as it performs, as it unfolds on a weekly or month-to-month basis. Have you found yourself having to step up, I don't want to use the word enforcement, but monitoring, or as you put it yourselves, formal intervention?
Well, I think it's the nature of where we are in the cycle. And while I wouldn't want to indicate we go out looking for trouble in any way, at certain times in the cycle you get a lot more opportunities to get involved with the managing agents in a way that would certainly appear more challenging as opposed to sort of business developing. In particular, if you're in an environment where certain sectors of the market are at break even, and you want to start something new that's basically a Me Too operation, whether you enter a new class of business or you wanted to start a new syndicate or something else of that nature, that Me Too operation implies that you're only able to penetrate the market and build your own market share by either being more optimistic on price, a little broader-minded on terms, or willing to pay the intermediary more money. All of those may be commercially acceptable ideas, but if you're starting from a break-even point, that means any one of those three is going to push you over the edge to expected unprofitability. And one of our key charges under the franchise guidelines is not to approve business plans that don't have at least an expectation of profit.
Well,
so I think we'll end up challenging a bit more just because of where we are in the cycle.
But at the same token, even though where we are on the cycle is admittedly a low point, there have been a number of, or I should say a steady stream of syndicate entrants over the past year or so.
I don't know that I'd call it a steady stream, and the actual share of the market, we write about 25 billion pounds of premium gross, and the new entrants for 2011 comprise 100 million pounds if they hit all their targets, and it looks already like they're not going to do that.
That's a mere sliver. One of the, and I take your point, one of the other initiatives are the enhanced risk management framework that you put together in order to make sure that, I guess, the formal risk appetite and the governance structure are combined and able to be monitored closely, as you alluded to. How does this closer scrutiny and perhaps greater governing of where the backers of a syndicate or a new syndicate or a proposed new syndicate are really going to be able to invest their money, how does that affect new money when you meet with them? I mean, people perhaps who are not of the industry, who are just purely investors, who might come in thinking that, wow, to be a Lloyd's name would be a absolute wonderful investment, and then they come in, they understand, well, all right, there are strings attached. This is a different game. This is not a hedge fund. This is not an annuity. I mean, you have to come in, you have to meet these guidelines, and your underwriters have to meet these guidelines. You must have some tough conversations from time to time.
I think it's pretty important to be transparent so that they're making an educated purchase regarding their involvement in Lloyd's. And so when a new capital provider wants to talk about what they might do at Lloyd's, we try to spend a long time acquainting them with what we understand to be the general conditions in the market, and in particular any segments they display an interest in. And we also try and acquaint them with the way that Lloyd's works as a mutual. And I think there's a lot of people, very, very good people in the insurance business who have very proper ways of trying to make money, who would find there's still a fair bit of learning to do to fit into how you have to operate in a mutual as opposed to just operating on behalf of your own company. Mm-hmm. So I spend a lot of time trying to go over some of these cultural details and explain the fact that, well, one of Lloyd's great strengths is this unusual glue that holds them together over 300 years. That glue comes with a few strings where, even in my previous life, before I came to work at Lloyd's and I was running the managing agency for Berkshire, the capital provider, I would have conversations. I say to my colleagues at Berkshire, you are not going to believe what they want now. Yeah. And we'd laugh, but we'd deal with it. And over time, mm-hmm. you began to see the sense of it. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that relative to 10 years ago when I first had those discussions, there's far more sense and order to those things, thanks to the franchise board and some other things we've done. But it is an educational process, I think, that's pretty important to knowing exactly what you're getting into, because it isn't quite like doing business in another insurance environment.
No, it's very unique.
The number of advantages we have at Lloyd's come at the cost of having a structure that permits those advantages to take place. And I try to make sure people understand both sides of the equation of what we'll expect from them as members of the mutual, in addition to what they might expect from us in the way of the broader licensing, the efficiency of capital, and some of the other benefits.
That education process, in specific regard to the delegated authority business, for example, I've noticed that you're intent on shining a light, a technological light, if you will, into these indigestible masses of hundreds of thousands of risks that just come in every day, insisting that these be reviewed and looked at and accounted for individually. I mean, how considering it 30% of your business plus, I mean, this is a big initiative for you. Can you talk a little bit about that? How is that faring? I mean, what kind of pushback, if any, are you getting from the actual people writing the paper on it?
We aren't actually getting much pushback at all, and what we've done over the last year, while on the one hand, if you look at the strategy document from Lloyd's, we've indicated that delegated authorities in many cases are our preferred way of expanding the footprint of Lloyd's into jurisdictions where we can again capitalize on the local knowledge and local expertise.
Correct.
That's great, but at the same time, with giving some people these authorities, which range from prior submit where there's no real authority, it's mostly a marketing arrangement, to ones where there is some freedom on rates and structure of the contract, that we pursue the old Ronald Reagan approach, which is trust but verify. Uh-huh. And the verify part is what we've tried to do by strengthening what we do on the auditing front. If, for example, you have a delegated authority binder that you've entered into, you're also supposed to have, as a managing agent, an audit plan for that delegated authority. We have a team of people who go around to the managing agents and say, okay, let's see your audit plans. Let's see that you've actually affected them. If you have actually had the audit done, did it come up with any findings? If there were findings, have you acted on those findings? Mm-hmm. So we don't actually go out and audit the delegated underwriting authority holders themselves, but we insist that those people doing business with them have done what it takes to make sure that the original contractual undertakings that they had and the understanding of the business they were going to write continues to be the case. And given the pressures of a soft market, that's as important now as it has ever been.
Indeed.
The other thing that it's helped us with, by the way, is in this focus on auditing, the delegated authority underwriters themselves, the cover holders, have said they like what we're doing to try and force a more thorough but consolidated audit rather than have 5 or 6 syndicates who do business with them do audits in sequence, trying to collapse that into one really good audit that is shared amongst the underwriters seems to be a preferred way to go.
I think that's possibly a very key point, because each one of those cover holders is the recipient typically of an annual visit by a representative of a Lloyd's syndicate who comes with a tally sheet and sits down and says, okay, here's how you did or here's how you didn't do. So those cover holders often are overlooked. They're also looking for protection or cover from sort of being treated uniquely. So that's an interesting observation on their point. Let me point out another area of interest, and that would be the fact that I mean, you're the world's largest broker market, and the top 3 brokers now account for at least 50% of your premium. And we're talking, of course, about the soft market cycle. That means that premiums go down, and that means retention levels go up, and all contribute to a lower commission stream into the broker market, into the broker's coffers, which means that being smart people and stock holding companies, they have to try to maximize new revenue as much as possible, so they've come on with a variety of new services and offerings. One of the points in your plan, you mentioned that initiatives that brokers might have come upon in order to increase revenue, any such initiatives that could give rise to, quote, prudential concerns on the part of the franchise board would prompt a quick response by the corporation. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, we all read the same newspapers. We all know some of the public situations with contingent fees and things of that nature that have been brought up. And how do you see the situation from where you sit, considering you're the person who would be seeing and discerning whether or not it is a prudential concern, than being the one who would be promptly responding?
Okay, there's a few aspects to that. In terms of the brokers, I have an enormous sympathy for their position. In a declining revenue market, they're under considerable pressure to continue to show earnings growth and other things, so they tend to put pressure where they think it can bear the most results, and somewhat surprisingly to me, given how much value they really add to their customers, they don't seem to be able to ask their customers for much more, so they've turned at this point in the cycle to asking underwriters to pay a bit more. And in many cases, they try to offer services and other things that would justify additional payments that would be, at least in their terms, billed as services provided rather than attaching to any one submission or underwriting placement slip. If you do provide services under the new Solvency II guidelines, you need to have a service level agreement, you need to have service standards that are monitored, and you have to watch them and pay attention to them, so you make sure that everybody's living up to what it is they're charging you for. If you can't bring some specificity to those charges as to how they relate to the services you are offering, then the UK has just passed a fairly broadly written bribery act, which everybody, even looking at corporate entertainment over here, is looking to make sure they're not falling afoul of the new terms and strictures of that. So you have to be fairly careful in terms of what you do to do that. But having said all that, my personal concern is what consenting adults do in terms of what the proper consideration between intermediary and insurer or reinsurer is between those consenting adults. But what I do think it's my responsibility to do is to make sure that there is appropriate disclosure to the client of the actual cost to him of what he's paying and what his intermediary, because these guys are acting for the client, not for the underwriter. What is his consideration in the transaction? So to try and make it possible for people to be aware that there are fees that may not show on the slip, if they exist, we try to highlight them in the aggregate, not specific. And also, key to that is I want to make sure the market understands what its true cost of distribution is, and it doesn't get lost in the accounting below the line or elsewhere. So my concern is for transparency in terms of what the real costs of an intermediary channel are, and also to make absolutely sure that there's every opportunity for the insured to understand his costs, so we don't find ourselves called on the carpet in the way some people were called on the carpet 8-9 years ago.
Right. I think that would be that's a very, very laudable goal, and we wish you well with that. And I think you're going to succeed with that. Let me just give you 3 quickies. I know we're taking up some of your time. I noticed in Insurance Insider was reporting yesterday that, quote, an internal Lloyd's document, which whatever that means, could be something they found on the radiator, shows that managing agents have planned to rein in their aviation underwriters this current year. Can you elaborate anything about that? Yeah,
I'm not quite sure what it is they're seeing. What I can say is every November and every May, I give sort of a State of the Nation address, and I talk about the various class of business and what the prospects are for them. And this is based on what managing agents tell us they're going to do through their business plan. And again, it's synthesized, and it doesn't give away anything about any one agent. It's sort of some market statistics, which by virtue of being in the market, we think it's responsibility of ours to tell you what's going on in that market. And as you might expect, sometimes people tend to share these things with journalists, and no big thing against journalists. They do what they do, and I think what they could be doing is drip feeding what they think was in that presentation, because I did share it with members of the market on a redacted basis where there weren't any specific numbers by the side, and maybe they've been able to extrapolate from some of those graphs on what they think is happening. And in fairness, if you talk about the aviation market, it wouldn't surprise me if the market members were planning to write less this year than they did last year, given the results in that market. Right. And the failure of prices to move materially.
The prices have really failed to move materially. Our friend in Hanover, Ulrich Wallen, seems that he could develop a second career as a state legislative lobbyist. He's once again pulled off a coup. He was the first one from Tallahassee to go through Tallahassee to get a reduced collateral requirement. Now he's done the same trick with New York with the reduction from 100% down to 20% for the alien insurer rule. Any reactions to that? Comments? Long overdue? Or?
Well, I certainly applaud Ulrich's efforts and success. And I guess what I can say is we are also in discussions in both places. We're a little more complicated than one insurance or reinsurance entity, and so it's going to take us a little bit more time to sort of work out the details, but it's an incredibly positive move to see both Florida and New York taking these steps.
One other final last question. Lloyd Levine is busy setting up his bank. We wish him the best. To the extent I have any money, I'll probably deposit it there. Any movement on the next chairman? Do you think it should be somebody from the industry or outside the industry? What's the timeline on that that you've heard?
Lloyd Levine is here through the end of the year, 2011, and the process of identifying candidates is well established, and they're down to a shorter list of who's left, and that final interviewing process of those short few is occurring. I'm not sure when, the white smoke will come out of the corner of the Vatican on this one. But I know that the Cardinals are certainly meeting, and it looks like there's some fairly good progress on determining who might be the replacement. I would be very surprised, additionally, if there weren't a period of time where it was widely known who the new chairman would be in anticipation of when Lord Levine would leave. So I don't know the exact dates. I know that it hasn't finally been determined. I do know that they have some very, very viable candidates. So
that's
hopefully that process goes as it currently is, which is pretty smoothly.
Yeah, it's certainly the source of a lot of speculation, as you can imagine. So, well, Tom, thank you.
And Lord
Go ahead.
Levine's been great for us in terms of helping us expand the platform and really put Lloyd's back on the positive slope that I think it is.
He's been very visible. He's been very diligent, energetic, and he seems to be absolutely indefatigable. He just does not get tired. You see.
When I'm 69, I hope I have as much energy.
Well, I see date lines with his name in them, and they're separated by 2,000-mile hops, and they're like one day after another. It's like, my God, the guy must live on a plane. So. Well, Tom, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon and talking to you in the future, and best of luck with a very tough job.
Well, thanks very much, Frank. I appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.